everybody, welcome back to my channel. So I'm back with another do's and don'ts video, and this time we are focusing on eyes in colour pencil, and I'm going to go through some common mistakes beginners make when drawing eyes and how you can fix them. If you want to check out a real-time version of this so you can follow along with me and learn exactly how I'm doing it every step of the way, as well as all of the other features of the face, make sure you check out my Patreon, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. And also all of my materials, as always, are linked down below as well in the description, so you can find out exactly everything that I'm using. But let's get straight into today's tutorial. So as always, the first common mistake people make is doing their sketch too dark and not doing an accurate sketch. So you need to make sure that you got an accurate sketch before you add the colored pencil, because you can't go and change stuff and erase your sketch once you've added the colored pencil. And you shouldn't do it too dark, because then the pencil lines are showing through. So make sure accurate sketch and do it very lightly. The next thing is you don't want to have blunt pencils. There's no need to have blunt pencils, because that means that you're going to have the white grain of the paper showing through. So when I'm doing this whole thing, my pencils aren't necessarily sharp. Some of the times they are. I don't want to blunt the ones that were already really sharp, but the ones that were blunt, I didn't go in and sharpen them, which means that you get this white graininess showing through. Another common mistake with eyes is just to do a really dark black ring around the iris and also on the upper lid and the crease. But because the upper crease is skin, it's not necessarily always going to be that dark. So don't always go in with black to do the crease and stuff. Another thing is that I'm not layering, I'm not burnishing. I'm burnishing in certain areas too early, like on the iris. But on other areas, I haven't really pushed down on the pencil at all, which means that it looks very patchy and very grainy. Another thing you don't want to do is you don't want to go in with a block colour like a black on the eyebrows, because it looks unrealistic, it looks flat, and there's no hairs, you can't see all the individual hairs, so make sure you don't do that. And also when you're doing the eyelashes, you don't want to do them like spiders' legs, you don't want to do them just all straight and all the same. I'll be showing you some ways that you can get realistic eyelashes in a second. But now let's get on to the do version, and I'm going to walk you through how I would create a realistic eye in colored pencil. So the first thing that I'm doing is, you can notice you can hardly see my sketch at all, and that is because it is super light, just so that I can barely see it. Another thing is that it is accurate to start with. I didn't get every single detail in there because you don't need to, but I've got the basic shapes and structures already marked in. Now, one thing you will see that's much different than before is the fact that I'm doing this really lightly and I'm using sharp pencils, which means that you can see that there's not as much white graininess showing through. It's all being filled in by the pencil. And that's simply because I'm keeping my pencils sharp. It is so important to make sure that you're layering your colored pencils slowly and very lightly to start with. You don't want to burnish too early, because this means that you're flattening out the tooth of the paper, and this stops you being able to add layers of colored pencil over the top. So make sure you don't burnish too early, just lightly layer to start with, and as you add more and more layers, then you can add more pressure. Another thing is, for the skin and for the darkest areas like the crease, I still didn't use a black. I went in with a dark brown because this gives a more natural look. You want to steer clear of the black unless the area is super dark, like the upper lash line and the eyelashes and the pupil. Otherwise, I would avoid using it because it just doesn't need to be there. So one common thing is with the white of the eye, a lot of people do it just white, or they add very little shading to it, when in reality the white of the eye has actually quite a lot of grey shading in it. So if you're unsure how dark to go with your grey, I really recommend importing your reference photo, which you should always use when doing realism. I recommend putting your reference photo into a software like Paint, using the eyedropper tool to select areas of the white of the eye just to see how grey it really is, especially in the lighter areas and then the more shadowed areas. So I layered up those grey tones on the white of the eye, and then I used a lighter colour like the buff titanium to blend it out with a bit more pressure just to get it really smooth. Another thing to notice about the white of the eye is that it actually has some flesh tones in it as well. Especially near the tear duct, where the tear duct transitions into that white of the eye, there's some flesh tones that overlap with the white of the eye. And adding subtle colour changes like this is what's really going to make it look realistic. So once I finished that white of the eye, as you can see, I went on to do the tear duct and start adding skin colours to the upper crease. And to do this, I added a lot of the burnt ochres and burnt siennas. And again, I was just layering the colours like the reference photo. I first blocked in where the darkest shadows was using a darker pencil, and then I used lighter colours to burnish and add highlights. So now I'm going into the iris. And one thing that I'm doing differently here is that instead of just adding blues, I added a lot of greys. With blue eyes, a common mistake is just to use a very bright blue. But this is going to give you more of an artificial look. So what you want to actually do is use a lot of grey tones as well. And then you can use something like a bluer colour just to really make it pop. But don't just use blue and black. Otherwise, that's going to give you an unrealistic, artificial sort of look. So what I did was I layered some dark greys, especially around the outside edge of the iris. So before I just left it black. And in this case, I used a bit of black as well, but I went over it with a darker grey and some blue tones so it didn't just look flat black. I always like to use black, but I don't like to leave it necessarily on its own. I like to layer colours over the top of it to glaze some colours over the top just to make it look more realistic and give it more depth rather than looking flat. I then went in and I added some white highlights to the iris just to add a bit of detail. And one thing you can notice is that I preserved the white of the highlight, but then I added grey tones to it because the white of the highlight isn't actually always white. There's always some sort of tone to it in certain areas. But anyway, now I'm working on the skin. As you can see, I added a layer of the burnt ochre 10%, which is just a very light colour. If you've got Prismacolors, it'll be something like the light peach colour. And I just very lightly added that. I used a sharp pencil. I went in circular motions, which means that you can get that smooth coverage. And I just added a layer of that down to the whole area around the skin. I'm now perfecting the upper crease, and I just layered some darker tones because the crease was the darkest part of the skin. And I'm also adding some burnt siennas under that waterline as well. So the bottom waterline. But now I really want to start to get that skin more blocked in. So I'm going in with that burnt ochre 10% again, and this time what I'm doing is I'm applying a bit more pressure over the top, which means that I'm getting more of a kind of strong coverage and it's also quite smooth. But for the shadows, I'm glazing some colours over the top before I fully burnish, which means that I can get a nice rich tone and then I can smooth it out after. It's really important with realism to get the contrast right. If you want your image to pop, then you need to make sure that you've got your dark shadows in and also your highlights in. And this contrast is what's going to really make it pop and stand out. So don't be afraid to go dark with your colours, and also don't be afraid to have some bright highlights as well. So once I added in all of the base tone for the skin, I'm going in with the white pencil to burnish out some of those highlighted areas. And then I go in with the burnt ochres to smooth out some of those darker shadows. So I just keep layering. This does take a while. If you're doing realism, especially with colour pencils, it is a very time-consuming process. This eye took me a good couple of hours to do, and it takes that long to really layer the colours and to get it looking realistic and to focus on all of the little details. So I do recommend taking regular breaks because you can get tempted to rush through it, especially if you've been sitting there for a long period of time. So take regular breaks, come back to it and just really slowly layer, and it will be worth it. The final result will be much better and much more worth it rather than going in really hard with a pencil straight away. So as you can see, I'm just making small little colour adjustments just to make it as accurate as possible to the colour in the reference photo. I'm really just working on adding those shadows. So I go in with the shadowed colour and then I go in with a lighter colour just to blend it out, soften it out. So I'm just working on that inner corner bit of the eye. And I'm adding some highlights now, pressing hard on that white pencil just to really make it stand out. So now I'm adding some more skin around the eyebrow. And before with the eyebrow, you can see that when I did the eyebrow, I just did a really blocked black colour. And I did it really harsh, and you're going to see in a minute how I would change that to make it a lot more realistic, really simply. So I'm just tweaking some areas of the iris, the upper crease and the lash line. If I notice something's a bit off, I like to go in and tweak it. I don't ever just think one area is completely finished. I'm more flexible to think that if I spot something, I can go in and change it. And this is really good, so make sure that you don't just call one area finished and then stop going back to it. I know it can be worrying if you think that you might ruin your piece, but if you notice something's off, then go in and fix it. So before I do the eyebrow, it's time to get in all of the eyelashes. And before I said what you don't want to do is you don't want to do them like spider legs, you don't want to make them straight, and you don't want to make them all the same sort of length. So here what I'm doing is I'm first doing the bottom lash line. And the bottom eyelashes are a lot sparser than the top eyelashes. So what I'm doing is I'm going in with a very, very sharp Faber-Castell Black Polychromos pencil, which is a lot crisper and gets you that more defined detail. And what I'm doing is I'm curving the eyelashes with the kind of direction that they should be going in. So if you're unsure how eyelashes should curve, make sure you check out lots of reference photos and have a look about the length of them compared to the upper lashes. Look at how sparse they are or how full they are, and also the direction they're going in and their length. So I'm following the reference photo. It's really important to follow the reference photo. So the upper eyelashes were quite long, and what I did first was I blocked them all in, but you can see they look quite thin. So I went in with that pencil again just to thicken up the roots. And I like to make the eyelashes look like they're thicker at the roots and then they get thinner towards the ends rather than being the same thickness all the way around. And this gives a much more realistic look. Another thing is that to make it look even more realistic, some of the eyelashes were kind of curved down towards the white of the eye and cutting off part of the white of the eye. And this kind of changes, and these subtle details are stuff that you need to notice, and this will make your drawing look even more realistic, because if you didn't have them, then it would probably look a bit strange. Now what you can see me using just to tweak the shape of the eyelashes was a small crafting tool, which can be used to lift up the wax of the pencil to reveal lighter layers underneath. So now we are going in with the eyebrow, and you can see straight away the difference in my technique. This time I'm going in with that sharp pencil and I'm using it to feather some eyebrow pencil strokes just with the direction that the eyebrows are going in. So the hairs on the eyebrows go in all sorts of different directions, not like randomly, but obviously the bottom eyebrows kind of go upwards and then the upper eyebrows are kind of pointing downwards and they sort of meet in the middle. So really study your reference photo and make it look like the hairs are growing out of the skin rather than just a block of hairs on top of the skin. Really make sure that they're working together. Another thing I noticed from the reference photo is that there were small patches of skin showing through the eyebrows, like in the little gaps. So I also added a layer of burnt ochre 50%, which is a colour that we use for the skin, on top of the eyebrows. And this meant that when I added those darker hairs underneath, wherever there wasn't those dark hairs, that skin colour would show through. And we'd get that more natural look, rather than it just being one block colour. But again, I'm just going over the top and I'm feathering the pencil strokes in the direction that the eyebrow hairs are going in. And you can always add a few little sparse ones as well, just to make it look even more natural. And the most important thing is the way the eyebrows feather into the main eyebrow. So like on the top bit of the eyebrow, you can see that I've feathered some pencil strokes downwards to meet into the eyebrow to give that really natural look from the skin onto the eyebrow. The last thing that I like to do is go in with a crafting knife and pull up some lighter hairs, because obviously it lifts the wax so you can get those subtle light hairs. Now I'm just making some final little adjustments, tweaking things as I need to. But that is basically it for this tutorial. I really hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something new. If you want to see even more tutorials like this, I've got more do's and don'ts coming up, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and tick that bell icon to be notified on my future videos. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye everyone!